Epochs! Hello and welcome back to another episode of Epochs, where I shall be continuing the story, the narrative all about Magellan's terrifying circumnavigation of the globe. If you remember last time, we left off where I was just about to tell you the story of the Great Mutiny at Port St. Julian. Remember that it was the winter in the southern hemisphere, so the summer months for us in the northern hemisphere, but it's actually winter down there because they're off to the coast of Argentina, essentially. So the weather's so bad, there's so many storms, terrible, terrible storms, that their tiny little wooden ships just will get battered to pieces eventually. So they have to winter, in inverted commas, in a safe harbour or a safe inlet. And Magellan decides he's found one. They call it Port St. Julian. And it's over those winter months that there is a mutiny, or the main big mutiny. And this is one of the set piece moments in the 3-year voyage. It's one of the really big events. If you have just a 10 or a 15-minute overview of Magellan's voyage, this will get mentioned. Okay, so it's a big thing. If you remember before, earlier in the voyage, there had been a type of aborted mutiny. Shortly after they left, some of the other captains, some of the Castilian, Spanish captains, were unhappy with Magellan and they started being a bit insubordinate, but it never really turned into a full mutiny, and Magellan sort of quashed it, and it never became a full thing. But here it does. So we'll get into that. I'm going to be reading from Lawrence Bergreen's Over the Edge of the World once again, because it is one of the very, very best books and goes into loads of detail. So and it's well written, so I like it. All right, let's pick up the narrative. He tells us, quote, "Anticipating a long, grueling winter in Port St. Julian, Magellan placed his crew on short rations, i.e. giving them less food, which it never goes down well. You know, they're living an extremely harsh life as it is already, and the only thing they've really got to look forward to in any way is the crappy food they're given. So to even put them on short rations, to even ration that one thing, we're told again and again and again that that's what made, one of the main reasons that made the normal average sailor extremely unhappy. But Magellan wouldn't have done it for no reason. He obviously felt like he needed to. He's not that cruel and unusual. He's not deliberately sadistic for no reason. He wouldn't want to undermine his own authority like that for no reason. So he obviously felt he needed to do it. Nonetheless, it's extremely unpopular. Even though the ships groaned with the butchered meat of geese and, quote, sea wolves, you know, these geese, penguins, almost certainly penguins, we think, and the sea wolves, some type of walrus, it seems. So they had geese and sea wolves, and fish abounded in the harbour. Nonetheless, Magellan puts them on short rations. As I say, he must have felt he needed to do that, but the men aren't happy. We're told, after the unbroken succession of life-threatening ordeals they had faced over the previous 7 weeks, the seamen expected to be rewarded for their courage and perseverance, not punished. See, they saw it as a punishment. Outraged by the rationing, they turned insubordinate. Some insisted that they return to full rations, while others demanded that the fleet, or some part of it, sail back to Spain. So that's quite serious. If people are even murmuring that they should sail back to Spain, well, that's really bad. That can and did or could undermine the whole thing. Wouldn't talk like that. Nobody would talk like that if they were, you know, completely on board within their own minds, within their own soul. If they were on board with the project of getting to the Spice Islands, or at least rounding South America, or finding a strait through South America. It just seems it's sort of undeniable, isn't it, that some men, fair few of the men, they're not up for this. They're not truly up for it, which is a worry, isn't it? Green continues saying, "They did not believe the strait existed. They had tried again and again to find it, risking death while coming up against one dead end after another. If they kept going, they argued, they would eventually perish in one of the cataclysmic storms afflicting the region, or simply fall off the edge of the world when the coastline finally ended. Surely King Charles did not mean for them all to die in the attempt to find a water route to the Spice Islands. Surely human life had some value." Magellan obstinately reminded them that they must obey their royal commission and follow the coastline wherever it led. The king had ordered this voyage, and Magellan would persist until he reached Land's End or find the strait. How astounded he was to see bold Spaniards so faint-hearted, or so he said. As far as their provisions were concerned, they had plenty of wood here in Port St. Julian, abundant fish, fresh water and fowl. their ship still had adequate stores of biscuit and wine if they observed rationing. Consider the Portuguese navigators, he exhorted them, who had passed 12 degrees beyond the Tropic of Capricorn without any difficulty, and here they were, 2 full degrees above it. What kind of sailors were they? Magellan insisted he would rather die than return to Spain in shame, and he urged them to wait patiently until winter was over. Yeah, Magellan couldn't really return without having done a lot more than what he's done so far. The idea that he would get, a bit of the way down the Argentinian coastline and then turn back, it's sort of not good enough. He would certainly be in trouble if he did that. There would be some sort of investigation or inquiry, some sort of commission to find out, and everyone questioned to find out exactly what was done. And if during that investigation it was found that Magellan had got this far, and then there was a few murmurings from the men, so he just turned around and left, that wouldn't be good enough. He would be failing in his orders if he did that. So for Magellan, there's just no question. And as we go further in the story, we'll see that Magellan's will to carry on is, basically cast iron in much, much more hazardous, much, much more perilous straits than this. He still refuses to turn around and go back. So the idea that he might turn around and go back at this stage, no. That would be humiliating and perhaps even dangerous for him. Goes back to Spain, he might get tortured for that, or even perhaps executed. Certainly his entire reputation would be ruined. Certainly he would never get to be the captain of an armada or a ship ever again, you would think. So it's a no from Magellan. The more they suffered, the greater reward they might expect from King Charles, Magellan argued. They should not question the king, he advised, but discover a world not yet known, filled with gold and spices to enrich them all. This eloquent speech to the vacillating crew members brought Magellan a few days' respite, but only a few. His stern words had confirmed their worst fears about his behaviour and his do-or-die fanaticism. See, some see it as not just following your orders, but you're being fanatical about it. That's what a lot of the guys on the voyage that survived said of him, that he was a fanatic. You can make up your own mind on that once you've heard the whole story, but I don't think certainly at this stage, this decision-making tree at this point, is not fanatical. It's just having the courage of your convictions. It's just, not giving up needlessly. It would be sort of giving up almost needlessly if they did turn around at this stage. Okay. Bergreen says, on the most basic level, they believed he considered their lives expendable. In the following days, the men began to bicker. National prejudices suddenly flashed like well-oiled swords drawn from scabbards to cut and slash, usually at Magellan himself. Once again, the Castilians argued that Magellan's insistence that he intended to find the strait or die was proof that he intended to subvert the entire expedition and get them all killed in the process. All this talk of glorifying King Charles, they felt, was merely a stratagem to trick them into going along with Magellan's suicidal scheme. Anyone doubting Magellan's intention to subvert the expedition had only to examine the course they had been following, southward, ever southward, into the eternal cold, whereas the Spice Islands and the Indies lay to the west. It was warm and sunny, and where luxury surely abounded. In the midst of this turmoil, the officers and crew observed the holiest day of the year, Easter Sunday, April the 1st. Yeah, one thing to mention, if people might not know, in the medieval world, the late antiquity, Easter is much more important, much more religious than Christmas. In our day and age, or certainly in England, where I was raised, Christmas is much more important. If anyone who doesn't particularly go to church, if you're ever likely to go to church, you'll be much more likely for a Christmas mass than Easter. But for those that are religious, will already know this. Those people will know that Easter is much more important. Obviously, the resurrection of Christ rather than his birth, and this was certainly the case in the 17th century. If you're Castilian or Portuguese or European at all, Easter is the big one. Easter, not Christmas. At this moment, Magellan had one paramount concern: who was loyal to him and who was not. With a sufficient number of loyal crew members, he would be able to withstand this latest and most serious challenge to his authority. Without them, he might be imprisoned, impaled on a halberd, or even hanged from a yardarm by hell-bent mutineers. To assess the extent of danger he faced, he carefully interviewed each member of the crew. With sweet words and big promises, Jean de Maffra recalled, Magellan told them the other captains were plotting against him, and he asked them to advise him what to do. So he's got his ship, the Trinidad. There's 4 other ships. Some seems like they might be loyal to him, some seem like they might not. So Magellan's making sure that all the men aboard his ship the flagship Trinidad completely loyal first and foremost, right? Because if he hasn't got their backing, then it's probably all over already. So where these sweet words and big promises, that was to his own crew aboard Trinidad, right? And he's telling them that he's heard that some of the other ships are captained by Spaniards or Castilians anyway, that they might not be loyal, and have they got his back? They replied that their only advice was that they were willing to do as he commanded. Magellan openly told the crew that the conspirators had resolved to kill him on Easter Day while he attended Mass ashore, but that he would feign ignorance and go to Mass all the same. This he did, and secretly armed, went to a small sandy islet where a small house had been built to accommodate the ceremony. So quite brave of Magellan to sort of do that, sort of deliberately, put himself in danger, effectively. Burgreen now. Magellan expected to see all 4 captains at Easter Mass, but only one, Louis de Mendoza of Victoria, arrived. The air crackled with tension. Both conversed, de Maffra says, concealing their emotions under blank countenances, and attended Mass together. At the end of the ceremony, Magellan pointedly asked Mendoza why the other captains had defied his orders and failed to attend. Mendoza replied, lamely, that perhaps the others were ill. Still feigning bonhomie, that he's happy. Magellan invited Mendoza to dine at the Captain General's table, a gesture that would force him to proclaim his loyalty to Magellan. But Mendoza coolly declined the request. Magellan appeared unfazed by Mendoza's insubordination, but the Captain General now knew that Mendoza was a conspirator. Mendoza returned to Victoria, where he and the other captains resumed plotting against Magellan, sending messages by longboat from one ship to another. So, straight away, this is quite serious, this mutiny. It doesn't seems like anyway, from the accounts we've got, a few accounts, it didn't sort of build up slowly, although you can imagine that the reality of it sort of did over weeks. But by the time they're at Port St. Julian and the rations are cut, it seems like it's in full swing sort of right away. Again, the real reality is that these things would ramp up over many days or weeks, but by this stage, it's in full swing, basically, isn't it? After Mass, only Magellan's cousin, Alvaro de Mesquita, the recently appointed captain of San Antonio, came aboard Trinidad to dine at the Captain General's table. Magellan realised that the empty chairs made for an ominous sign. At the moment, Magellan capitalised on a piece of luck. The longboat belonging to Concepcion's captain, Gaspar de Quesada, lost its way in the strong current while ferrying conspiratorial messages between the rebel ships and, to the dismay of the men aboard, found itself drifting helplessly towards the flagship and Magellan himself, the one individual they did not want to encounter at that moment. To their surprise, the crew of Trinidad, at Magellan's direction, rescued them from the runaway longboat. Even more amazing, Magellan welcomed them aboard the flagship and provided them with a lavish meal, which included plenty of wine. At dinner, the band of would-be mutineers drank a great deal and decided that they had nothing to fear from the Captain General after all. They even revealed the existence of the plot to Magellan. They confided that if the plot succeeded, he would be captured and killed that very night. That's an odd thing, isn't it, that these men decided to do that? Perhaps their heart wasn't particularly in the mutiny either. People have poured over this mutiny, exactly what was going on. A lot of the men's hearts obviously weren't in the mission to begin with, otherwise there wouldn't have been any sort of mutiny. But then it seems like the mutineers, a lot of them, their heart wasn't in that either, right? Because if you're going to do something like this, it's got to be all or nothing, right? It's got to be 100% if you're going to pull off a successful mutiny. So it seems like at least that one rescued longboat of sailors from Concepcion, it seems like they weren't necessarily 100% on board with the mutiny. It is odd to see what's going on, the way this mutiny plays out, and it ebbs and flows. Burgreen continues. Hearing this, Magellan lost all interest in his visitors and busied himself readying the flagship against attack. Once again, he questioned his crew to see who was loyal to him and who was not, and satisfied that Trinidad's men would take his side when the mutiny inevitably erupted, awaited the inevitable assault. So he's waiting to be attacked by his own men. It's very serious very quickly. It's seen, isn't it? That's the impression we get. Whether that was how it really, really played out in reality, we don't know. Pigafetta, the main chronicler, says very little about all of this because he's an extremely pro-Magellan man, extremely 100% loyalist to Magellan. And this whole episode doesn't make Magellan look good. One, that there would be a mutiny in the first place, right? That speaks volumes about your leadership. If you were a good, solid, strong, loved, adored leader, there would never ever be a mutiny. Then, as you'll find out, the way Magellan ultimately deals with it all also doesn't make Magellan put him in the best possible light, shall we say. So Pigafetta decides to say very, very, very little about it all. So we have to get the details from some of the other sources, a few of the other men that survived, and what they said about it. Burgoyne continues. Late that night, Conception stirred with life. The captain, Quesada, lowered himself into a longboat and quietly made his way to San Antonio. He was joined there in the dark water, lapping at the ship's hull, by Juan de Cartagena, former captain, Bishop's unacknowledged son and frustrated mutineer. Juan Sebastian Elcano, a veteran Basque mariner who served as Conception's master, and a corps of 30 armed seamen. So, just to say, during this episode, there'll be a fair few names. I introduced you to a few of them in, I think, episode 1 or 2. So I hope you can sort of keep in mind who's who. Usually we're reminded if someone's a captain or something. But one person there, or two people actually, that we must mention, there's a Cartagena, Juan de Cartagena. He was the one that sort of thought that his authority was sort of above Magellan's in some way, that he was the Cassa's man on the voyage, and thus his authority was in some senses above Magellan's. So, and he's already been demoted, so he's extremely unhappy. And the other one to mention is Elcano, Juan Sebastian Elcano. So just to cut to the end, I think you already know this. He is the one of the main men that survives when that one ship turns up back in Seville 3 years later with only about 18 men aboard. He's the most senior person. He's basically the captain, this Elcano. You know, some people call it the Magellan Elcano expedition. So he's an important character who will crop up in the story from time to time. Anyway, at this stage, he's part of the mutiny. Okay, the story goes on. Under cover of darkness, they boarded San Antonio and rushed to the captain's cabin, entering with a flourish of steel, rousting the hapless Mesquita out of his bunk, who's loyal to Magellan. This had once been Cartagena's ship, and in his mind it still was. Mesquita offered little resistance as the party of mutineers clapped him into irons and led him to the cabin of Geronimo Guerrera, where he was placed under guard. By this time, word of the uprising had spread throughout the ship, and the crew sprang to life. Juan de Eloriega, the ship's master and a Basque, valiantly tried to dismiss Quesada from San Antonio before any blood was shed, but Quesada refused to stand down, whereupon Eloriega returned to his boatswain, Diego Hernandez, to order the crew to constrain Quesada and quash the mutiny. "We cannot be foiled in our work by this fool," Quesada shouted, knowing that there could be no turning back, and he ran Eloriega through with a dagger again and again, 4 times in all, until Eloriega, bleeding profusely, collapsed. Quesada assumed Eloriega was dead, but the loyal master was still alive, though perhaps he would have been better off if he had died on the spot. Instead, he lingered for 3.5 months until he finally died from the wounds he received that night at Quesada's hands. As the two struggled, Quesada's guard took Hernandez hostage, and suddenly the ship was without officers. The bewildered crew, without anyone to give them orders and fearing for their lives, gave up their arms to the mutineers. Remember, these mutineers have got 30 armed men with them, so a ship not prepared for something like that, yeah, they're outgunned. One of their number, Antonio de Coca, the fleet's accountant, actually joined the insurgents, who stored the confiscated weapons in his cabin. The first phase of the mutiny had gone off as planned. Pigafetta, normally a thorough chronicler of the voyage, offers little guidance to the mutiny. In this case, he was close, too close, to Magellan to be helpful. As a Magellan loyalist, he resisted the temptation to hear or repeat any ill concerning his beloved captain. He eloquently presented the Magellanic myth of the great and wise explorer, but at the same time, he turned a blind eye to the scandals and mutinies surrounding Magellan throughout the voyage. In his one cursory mention of the drama at Port St. Julian, Pigafetta even confuses the names of the principal actors. The chronicler, who could be extremely precise when he wished, likely got around to mentioning the mutiny only after the voyage, when he felt safe enough to discuss the bloody deeds happening all around him. The mutineers in control of San Antonio swiftly converted her into a battleship. Elcano, the Basque mariner, took command and immediately ordered the imprisonment of 2 Portuguese who appeared loyal to Magellan, Antonio Fernandez and Goncao Rodriguez, as well as a Castilian, Diego Diaz. Quesada's servant raided the ship's stores, filling their hungry bellies with bread and wine. Remember, they'd been on short rations, so they're quite literally hungry, anything that they could lay their hands on, and they endeared themselves to their followers by allowing them to partake of the forbidden food. Father Valderrama, preoccupied with administering last rites to Eloriega, watched all and vowed to report the evil deeds to Magellan if he ever got the chance. Meanwhile, Elcano ordered firearms to be prepared. The arquebuses and crossbows, powerful state-of-the-art weapons, were broken out. Anyone attempting to approach the renegade ship would face a barrage of lethal arrows and muzzles belching fire. Within hours, the mutiny spread like a contagion to two other ships. Victoria, whose captain, Luis de Mendoza, had resented Magellan from the day they left Sanlúcar de Barrameda, i.e. Spain, i.e. from the beginning. He'd hated Magellan from the beginning. And the Concepcion. It was only a matter of time until Cartagena, Quesada, and the supporters came after Magellan himself. Only Santiago, under the command of Juan Serrano, a Castilian, remained neutral. Quesada, for the moment, decided to leave Santiago alone. It was a decision that would later haunt the mutineers. So already, within a few hours, it seems that the entire armada is completely split, or if anything, slightly more of them have joined this mutiny, whether against their will or not. Like 3 of the 5 ships are against Magellan, and 1 is, we're told, neutral. So not even completely on Magellan's side. And the mutineers are arming themselves. They are getting ready to attack Trinidad, take it by force, by main force, and, kill Magellan if they can. It's full bore. Burgoyne continues. The sun rose over Port St. Julian on the 2nd of April to reveal a scene of deceptive calm. The 5 ships of the Armada de Molucca rode quietly at anchor, their crew members sleeping off the previous night's excesses, because they would have had a whole bunch of wine. For the moment, the Captain General remained secure in his stronghold, Trinidad. As a test of loyalty, he dispatched a longboat to San Antonio, where Quesada and Elcano held sway, to bring soldiers ashore to fetch fresh water. As Trinidad's longboat approached, the mutineers waved the sailors away and declared that San Antonio was no longer under the command of Mosquita or Magellan. She now belonged to the mutineer, Gaspar Quesada. When the longboat brought this disturbing news back to Magellan, he realised he faced a grave problem, but he remained oblivious to the full extent of the mutiny. He believed he had to contend with only 1 rebellious ship, not 3, until he sent the longboat to poll the other ships and determine their loyalty. From his stronghold aboard San Antonio, Quesada replied, "For the king and for myself," and Victoria and Concepcion followed suit. So a mutiny can't get much more serious than this. It really is life and death for both parties, both factions. To make his point, Quesada audaciously sent a list of demands by longboat to the flagship. Quesada believed, with good reason, that he had Magellan boxed in, and he tried to force the Captain General to yield to the mutineers. In writing, Quesada declared that he was now in charge of the fleet, and he intended to end the harsh treatment Magellan had inflicted on the officers and crew. He would feed them better, he would not endanger their lives needlessly, and he would return to Spain. If Magellan acceded to these demands, said Quesada, the mutineers would yield control of the Armada to him. To Magellan, these demands were outrageous. To comply meant ignominy in Spain, disgrace in Portugal, years in a prison cell, and even death. Under these circumstances, he might have been expected to launch a full-scale attack on San Antonio, but for once Magellan restrained his need to assert his authority, because everything's so in the balance. Usually Magellan's the type that would sort of go berserk at that and just start firing cannons and stuff, but he realises that he is boxed in, right? It's 3 ships against 1. They've got more men, and even though Trinidad is the biggest ship, most powerful, still 3 against 1, he would probably lose if it came to an all-out, naval engagement. Essentially, he would probably lose. So he can't do that, or he feels he can't do that. He sent back word that he would be pleased to hear them out aboard the flagship. Of course, the mutineers were hesitant to leave their base. Who knew what awaited them aboard Trinidad? They replied that they would meet him only aboard San Antonio. To their astonishment, Magellan agreed. Having lulled Quesada and his followers into a sense of full security, Magellan quietly went on the offensive. By any objective measure, he operated at an enormous disadvantage. The mutineers controlled 3 out of the fleet's 5 ships, and most of the captains and the crews. They had popular sentiment on their side and weapons to back up their demands. In his diminished position, Magellan did not attempt to meet force with force. Instead, he sought to dismantle their revolt piece by piece, without placing himself in more peril than he already was. He began his attempt to recover his fleet by claiming the longboat carrying Quesada's communique. With this equipment in hand, he turned his attention to recapturing at least one ship, and then he would go after the others. He decided not to attempt to reclaim San Antonio, where the mutineers were deeply entrenched, but Victoria, where support for the rebels might be softer, and where he would be most likely to summon support. Victoria became the key to the whole plan, and to get her back, he resorted to a ruse. He filled the captured longboat with 5 carefully selected sailors and instructed them to appear sympathetic to the mutineers, at least at a distance. But beneath their loose clothing, they carried weapons, which they intended to use. Their ranks included Gonzalo Gomez de Espinosa, the captain at arms, so, a badass, a man whose whole job it was to be like a policeman or a marine, right? An actual soldier. His job is to be an enforcer or a killer, even. So Espinosa was with them, the master at arms, which automatically lent authority to their mission. Magellan gave the men a letter addressed to Luis de Mendoza, Victoria's captain, ordering him to surrender immediately aboard the flagship. If Mendoza resisted, they were to kill him. As soon as the longboat moved out of sight to begin its mission, the Captain General sent a second skiff into the water, filled with 15 loyal members of the flagship's crew under the command of Durante Barbosa, Magellan's brother-in-law, so a total loyalist. When the first longboat pulled up to Victoria, Mendoza allowed the party to board his ship. De Mafra, the best eyewitness to the unfolding mutiny, relates. Mendoza, a daring man when it came to the evil deeds, but too rash to take advice, told them to come aboard and give him the letter, which he set about reading in a careless manner and not as befits a man involved in such a serious business. Burgering now. According to other witnesses, Mendoza responded to the letter with mockery and laughter, crumpled the orders into a ball, and carelessly tossed it overboard. At that, Espinosa, the military officer, grabbed Mendoza by the beard, violently shook his head, and plunged a dagger into his throat as another soldier stabbed him in the head. Spurting blood, Victoria's captain slumped to the deck, lifeless. So they just murdered him right there and then. With Mendoza dead, Magellan held the advantage in the life and death contest. No sooner had the captain breathed his last than the second longboat rode into position beside Victoria, discharging its complement of loyalists who stormed the ship. Still, only 15 men, but, the element of surprise. And perhaps the crew were, their hearts might not have been in the mutiny in the first place, so there you have it. As Magellan had calculated, his guard met with little or no opposition. Stunned by the death of their captain, the crew meekly submitted to Magellan's men. As if the sight of the dead officer was not insult enough to the other Castilians, Magellan later paid off Espinosa and his henchmen for this bloody deed in plain view of everyone. For this action, the Captain General gave 12 ducats to Espinosa, recalled Sebastian Elcano, one of the mutineers, and to the other 6, ducats each for Mendoza's and Quesada's savings. Was this the price of their lives? The Castilians asked themselves. A few ducats. If you enjoyed that preview, please consider heading over to lotuseaters.com to watch the full unabridged video.